Before the emperors, before the silk-robed officials and towering palaces, before history remembered names and dates, there was something far more enduring: ordinary life. In ancient China, most people did not live in courts or capitals. They lived in villages tucked between rivers and fields, along dusty roads, beneath wide skies that watched generations arrive, work, age, and disappear. Their lives were quiet, repetitive, and demanding, and yet, within that simplicity, there was an entire world of meaning. To understand ancient China, you must begin before sunrise, because that is when most lives truly began. As the first pale light, Xiao Guang, crept over the horizon, a family stirred inside a small earthen house in the North China Plain during the Han Dynasty, 150 BCE. The walls were packed from mud and straw, thick enough to keep heat in during the bitter winter and cool during the blistering summer. The roof was tiled if they were fortunate. More likely it was thatched with rice straw, a home for spiders and a constant fire hazard. Smoke lingered faintly in the single multi-purpose room from last night's fire, which was never fully extinguished, just banked to preserve a precious ember. A rooster crowed somewhere nearby, not one but a chorus rippling across the village of perhaps 20 families. Dogs shifted. The village slowly awakened not to song but to necessity. Inside, a woman named Wei rose quietly. She had done this every morning for 30 years. Her hands, chapped and strong, knew what to do before her mind fully woke. She fed the fire with carefully gathered brush, boiled water in a coarse clay pot, and prepared a vast cauldron of millet porridge, zhou. There was no written schedule. Time was measured by light, by the 24 solar terms of the agricultural calendar, by the body's memory of hunger and fatigue. Her husband, Kong, rose soon after. He stretched, not leisurely, but carefully, assessing the old ache in his lower back from a lifetime of bending in flooded fields. A day of labor waited, and injuries were catastrophic. There was no safety net, no village doctor. If the body failed, the family starved. He pulled on his Han Fu, trousers and a cross-collared tunic of undyed hemp, coarse as sackcloth. Children stirred next. The youngest still slept, curled close to the fading warmth of the Kong, a raised sleeping platform heated from the kitchen fire below. The older ones, a boy of 10 and a girl of 7, rubbed sleep from their eyes and prepared to help. Childhood here was not a separate realm of play. It was an apprenticeship in survival. This was life for 90% of the people, not dramatic, not recorded on oracle bones or silk scrolls, but constant. It was the deep, steady heartbeat of a civilization. Breakfast was silent and efficient. The zhou, thin and gruel-like, served in wooden bowls, a few pickled vegetables, perhaps a scrap of salted fish on a festival day. Meat was a phantom memory, reserved for the new year or a wedding. Food was fuel, not indulgence. Every slurp was a calculation against the coming harvest. And then the day unfolded. Kong stepped outside into the crisp morning air, his breath pluming. He was not a slave, not a serf. He was a free farmer, a nongfu, on land his family had worked for generations. But here's a little hook, the quiet twist in his reality. He likely did not own it. The land was theoretically granted by the state, held in trust, and he paid for it not only with a portion of his crop, but with his body. He owed the state corvée labor, 1 month of every year conscripted to work on imperial projects, building roads, fortifying walls, dredging the mighty canals. His freedom was a thread, thin and easily cut. He joined a stream of other men, their tools over their shoulders, iron-tipped wooden plows, hoes of worn wood and metal. They walked to the vast open fields, a chessboard of small plots divided by low earthen ridges. This was the well-field system ideal, where 8 families worked their outer plots and collectively farmed the central ninth for the state. It was a system of shared obligation and shared risk. Here is something breathtaking to remember. Ancient Chinese farming was a masterpiece of silent engineering. This was not guesswork. This was applied science born of desperation and observation. They practiced crop rotation with millet, wheat, and soybeans, understanding that legumes restored the soil. They used every scrap of organic matter as fertilizer, human and animal waste, composted mulch, ash from the hearth. They built elaborate irrigation networks of canals, water-lifting devices like the counterweighted shadoof, and terraced hillsides into stairways to heaven, all coordinated by village elders who understood water law better than any imperial bureaucrat. Their calendar, the Xia calendar, was so precise it tracked the sun's position to within days, telling them exactly when to sow, when to transplant rice seedlings, when to harvest. A mistake by a week could mean a 30% smaller yield, could mean starvation. So work was careful, intentional, rhythmic, a sacred dance with the earth. Hooves of a village's single treasured ox pressed into the mud, the plow now of efficient iron bit into the loose soil, backs bent and straightened, again and again in motions unchanged for 1,000 years. No one questioned this routine. It was life, as natural as the turning of the stars. But pause. Look closer at Kong's tools. That iron plowshare? A revolution. Replacing wood and stone, it allowed deeper tillage, supporting a population boom. His simple wooden rake, the design is still used today. This is not stagnation. This is the slow, relentless accretion of perfection. Meanwhile, in the home, Wei's work was its own universe of skill. The home was not a refuge from labor. It was its nucleus. She would spend hours that morning at the loom, a complex wooden frame, weaving hemp into cloth. The rhythmic clack-clack thump was the soundtrack of her life. One bolt of cloth could take a month. Silk? That was for the nobles. For her, clothing was patched and repatched, worn until it disintegrated, then used as rag or stuffing. She would also grind grain on a stone quern, a back-breaking task that took hours to produce a day's flour. She would prepare the midday meal to be sent to the fields. She would tend the small vegetable garden behind the house, the precious private plot where she grew garlic, scallions, and gourds. She would care for the few chickens that provided eggs and eventually a rare feast. And she managed the family's most vital asset, its social credit. In a village where everyone knew everyone, reputation was currency. A family known for laziness, dishonesty, or disrespect would find itself isolated, unable to borrow tools, find marriage partners, or get help in a crisis. Wei's interactions at the well, her demeanor, her fulfillment of ritual duties were as crucial to survival as Kong's harvest. At midday, the sun a white coin in a hazy sky, work paused. The men gathered under a ginkgo tree at the edge of the field. Food arrived in baskets, cold joe, steamed buns, pickled mustard greens. Conversation flowed quietly, a low murmur about practical things, the upcoming tax assessment. The village headman had heard from a traveling merchant about a new decree, a tax on household cooking oil. They calculated silently how many more hours of weaving that would cost Wei. News traveled this way, mouth to ear. A flood had washed out a bridge 2 villages over, a bandit scare near the county seat. The magistrate's son was looking for a concubine. This was the internet of the ancient world, slow, personal, and incredibly accurate where local affairs were concerned. Most of these men, including Kong, could not read a single character. Literacy was a walled garden for the elite, the Shi, scholar gentry class. A single literate old man in the village, perhaps a retired clerk, held immense power. He would read imperial edicts posted in the market town, write letters, and interpret contracts. Words were literal power, controlled by a select few. And the emperor? He was a concept, a name uttered during ceremonies, the Son of Heaven. His presence was felt in the weight of the copper Bandliang coins in Kong's rarely used money pouch, in the conscription summons that could take a son away forever, in the standardized measures of grain taken as tax. When locusts came, or the Yellow River burst its banks, the villagers didn't just see natural disaster. They whispered, "Has the emperor lost the mandate of heaven? Has his virtue failed, disturbing the cosmic balance?" Their suffering was both personal and political, a sign of celestial displeasure. As afternoon wore on, work resumed under a wilting sun. Children were integrated into the economy. The boy, Liang, was with Kong, learning to guide the ox, to read the soil. The girl, Fen, was with Wei, learning the loom, the quern, the subtle art of fermentation to make soy sauce and vinegar. Their education was in the muscle memory of their hands. There was little room against this rhythm. But was there joy? Pay attention now. The payoff is in the subtle textures. As evening approached, a collective exhalation swept the village. The brutal clarity of the sun's demands softened into the gentle ambiguity of twilight. Smoke began to rise again from cooking fires. The air filled with the scent of boiling grain and stir-fried greens in a wok over a high flame, a cooking technology invented here for speed and fuel efficiency. Families reunited. The day's tension loosened. Food was shared from common dishes, and then in the flickering light of a rush lamp, a stalk dipped in animal fat, stories emerged. This is where the empire of the mind flourished. Folk tales of the clever Judge Bao righting wrongs, myths of the cowherd and the weaver girl, stars separated by the Milky Way, meeting once a year, a story that explained the stars and mirrored the separation of men's and women's labor. Tales of mischievous fox spirits and mountain ghosts warned children away from dangerous places. These stories were not mere entertainment. They were the vessel for morality, history, and survival knowledge. They taught that cunning could beat brute force, that loyalty was rewarded, and that the spirit world was real and had to be respected. And above all else, they reinforced the cult of the ancestors. As night deepened, Kong would approach a small wooden altar in the corner of the room. On it were simple spirit tablets, pieces of wood inscribed with the names of his father, grandfather, and great-grandfather. He would light a stick of incense, place a small cup of the day's rice wine before them, and bow deeply. This was not empty ritual. This was the core of identity. Ancestors were not gone. They were a living presence, watching, judging, capable of bringing blessing or calamity. To neglect them was to sever the family's connection to the past and future, to become a rootless ghost. The family line was the only form of immortality one could ever know. As true darkness fell, oil in the lamp ran low. Light was precious. Darkness was respected, a time for spirits and rest. Most people slept early, bodies arranged on the Kong, because dawn was a relentless creditor. But sleep was not empty. Dreams were taken seriously. A dream of a white horse could be an omen of a traveling official and thus trouble. A dream of a flood, a warning. The world was animistic, alive with meaning in every rustle of bamboo, every odd-shaped stone. Now, let's pull back. For thousands of years, across the Shang, Zhou, Qin, and Han dynasties, this pattern repeated. Dynasties rose and fell in spectacular fireworks of betrayal and battle, but in 1,000,000 villages the rhythm held. Fields were tilled, families formed, children learned by watching, elders taught by example. This endurance is the quiet, monstrous miracle of ancient China. Not the Great Wall, but the endless replicating wall of rice paddies. Not the terracotta army, but the living army of farmers whose collective labor built everything. Even suffering was endured collectively. When famine came, and it came with cruel regularity, the village contract was tested. Families with a little extra might share, knowing next season the roles could reverse. They would forage for bark, for guanyin mud, a kind of clay that filled the belly but offered no nutrition, and sometimes, in the unspeakable silence of utter despair, they made choices history glosses over. Yet they rebuilt, always. Why? Because identity was rooted in the land, the family, the ancestral graves. To leave was to become a ghost person, a yu-min, a floating, rootless ghost in life, with no rights, no community, no place in the cosmos. Staying and suffering was preferable to leaving and becoming nothing. And here is the most profound, mind-boggling truth of all. These ordinary people were not just the foundation of history, they were its shock absorbers and its engine. Their relentless labor produced the agricultural surplus that allowed cities to exist, bureaucrats to philosophize, and armies to march. Their adherence to filial piety and social hierarchy created a culture of stability so powerful it could absorb invading dynasties who would inevitably adopt Chinese ways to rule. When the Han court collapsed into the chaos of the Three Kingdoms, what kept the idea of China alive? Not the broken government, it was the villages, continuing their rituals, their farming cycles, their family structures, patiently waiting for order to be restored so they could pay their taxes to whoever was in charge. They were conservative to the point of rigidity, yet their daily innovations in farming tools and techniques slowly revolutionized the economy. They believed in a rigid, heaven-mandated order, yet their folk tales celebrated the clever peasant who outwitted the corrupt official. So when you imagine ancient China, do not picture only the forbidden city or marching warriors. Picture this: a woman's hands, cracked and bleeding from the loom, weaving the very fabric of society. A child memorizing not poems, but the exact feel of soil at the right moisture for sowing. A man bowing not to an emperor, but to a wooden plaque connecting a chain of life and duty stretching back centuries. A village deciding, in hushed tones by the well, how much to hide from the tax collector, exercising the only power they truly had. This is where civilization lived, not in the extraordinary moments of conquest or artistry, but in the unbearable weight of the ordinary, repeated with such faith and precision that it became timeless. They built an empire not with ambition, but with routine. They forged a culture not with proclamations, but with patience. Their story is not written in ink, but etched in the land, season by silent season, generation by invisible generation. And in that unbroken thread of daily life, you will find the true, resilient, and breathtaking heart of China.